Welcome to IT-säkerhetspodden. This episode is in English since we have Mikko Hyppönen with us. Mikko is a well-known security expert and is the Chief Research Officer at FSecure. Yes, and also have Eric by my side, of course.
Yeah, we are fighting with the technology demons as per usual. Technology is what it is. We wouldn't be able to sit here and speak without it. And sometimes you just want to throw the computer out the window.
So, Mikko, please tell me about yourself before we talk technical topics.
Well, I am a geek and a nerd. I've been doing computer stuff all my life, and I live in Helsinki, Finland. I've lived here all my life, but I guess my work has been pretty international for the last 20 years. I started working with information security in around 1991. I've been hunting online criminals ever since. I've done a lot of reverse engineering for malware samples. And then lately I've been focusing on researching what's going to happen next with the criminal underground and exactly where we are going with the security systems that we should be building for the future.
All right. So let's go back in time. What's your first experience with the computers? I noticed that you have a Atari shirt on, so maybe that's a clue.
Yeah, you're right. I do have an Atari T-shirt because I'm a geek and a nerd, although my first computer was not an Atari. My first computer was a Commodore 64, bought in 1984.
Real computer.
I was 14 years old. 2 years later, I was already selling my first programs that I was writing on that device. So I started with an 8-bit machine. Pretty early on, Nokia, which at the time was making computers in Finland, started shipping a device running the operating system CPM, which was called Mikko. So yes, Mikko like me, which was the first PC-like computer I used. It wasn't running MS-DOS, it was running CPM, but later on Nokia started making MS-DOS computers as well, and then Windows computers. But I started with assembly programming right after I got rid of writing BASIC on those old computer machines, and that's basically what basically got me into the computer business.
But so why cybersecurity?
When I was studying later around 1990, I just needed a place to do some part-time work, and I ended up working in this small startup company where I was doing database development for customers, which had nothing to do with security. However, that same company also did trainings, including information security trainings. And at the time, that meant training things like how to make backups of your computers to floppies and also about this new topic, which was computer viruses. So somehow over months that I was working there, I started moving from the database development side to the information security side. And turns out that company where I went working as a trainee in 1991 is the same company where I'm still working today. That company at the time was called Data Fellows. However, we renamed the company to FSecure in 1999, and that's where I'm working today.
So where does this... let me say, a passion for fighting viruses. Where does this come from?
I think it comes from something I said to my mom when I was a teenager. Because I guess I was asked, like, what do you want to do when you grow up? Maybe I was younger, maybe I was 10 years old, and I was asked, like, what do you want to do when you grow up? And I wanted to become a doctor. And the reason why I wanted to become a doctor was that I wanted to help people. I wanted to use learn something and then use my skills to help other people. And then later on, I realized that I'm not very good at medical stuff. For example, looking at blood makes me feel uneasy. So I realized that I'm not going to become a doctor. But instead, I became, some kind of a virus doctor. And that's still what drives me today. People, individuals, home users, companies, enterprises come to us asking for help. They come to us in their hour of need. They come to us with the kind of questions that they have no hope in hell solving by themselves. And we can use our skills to help them. And that just feels good. And of course,
Yeah.
this is a business. I mean, we don't do this for free. We are a publicly listed company which is trying to make a profit, but it's not just about that. It's also about the need for being on the side of the good guys fighting evil and helping the users.
Yeah. Yeah, you mentioned FSecure. What's your role at the moment at FSecure?
I've been in different roles over these 29 years. First as a coder, then as a reverse engineer, then a researcher, then I was running our support, I was running our lab. At some stage I had pretty big teams under me, but I realized that my passion is not in managing people. So right now I'm sort of like an independent entity. My title is the Chief Research Officer. I make my own research. I try to stay up to date on what's happening with our enemy, basically. Try to make some kind of a forecast about where we're going. But in practice, I spend very big part of my time meeting our clients and customers and doing briefings, like board level briefings or executive team briefings about information security, or doing public talks. So I'm on the road when of course, pandemic changed everything, but otherwise I would be on the road all the time and meeting our clients and customers or going to conferences.
And speaking about the pandemic, how would you say, first of all, how it's affecting Finland at the moment? Maybe it's a big difference between Sweden and Finland.
Well, there seems to be a big difference between Finland and Sweden indeed, because it's been handled differently by the government. And I guess the big benefit Finland had when the pandemic started, that we had just changed the Finnish prime minister and the top ministers, and we had basically 5 young ladies running the country. And when you are in a completely unusual situation in the middle of global crisis and pandemic, where the decision makers and leaders have to be very agile and have to be able to work very long hours, it's definitely an advantage to have young, sharp leaders like we had. And I think our leaders, our prime minister and the top ministers have been doing the right kind of decisions. And we've been faring fairly well. Obviously, we've had our problems and our society has been closed and there's been big economic damage, but the death rates are in good shape. And for example, the national contact tracing app was developed and shipped quite effectively. And I'm happy to report it's an open source app. You can download it from GitHub and look exactly at what it does. And it uses the Google, Apple contact tracing API for privacy protection of the users. And dozens of infection traces have been activated over the app already, one of which actually alerted our prime minister, Miss Sanna Marin. She actually had been in one location where someone who had an infection was, and her app, which she was running on her personal iPhone, alerted her personally like a couple of days later. So if biology got us into this mess, I do believe technology will get us out of this mess.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And how would you say that the cybersecurity world is affected by COVID-19?
The very first thing I was worried about when the pandemic started was the burden on our hospitals and clinics and medical research institutes, which all were obviously under a heavy load already. And since we know that everything is being run on computers, I was worried about extra strain on them because of online attacks. So that's why I actually made a public message especially to ransomware gangs, organized crime gangs, which lock computers to ask for ransom payments, telling them to stay the hell away from hospitals during the pandemic. And I wasn't really expecting much of a response, but we actually did get response from the criminals. I know of 3 organized crime gangs, which after my public message put out a notice saying that they will not attack hospitals during the pandemic. And that has actually mostly been true. We've seen a couple of instances where hospitals or medical research agencies have been hit by ransomware during these months, but mostly they've steered away towards other targets. Now, as we are recording this, during the previous week, there was the unfortunate incident in Germany where a patient died as she was being taken to a different hospital because a hospital in Düsseldorf, Germany, was hit with a ransomware attack. Interestingly enough, even in that case, when the researchers from the local police contacted the attackers didn't realize that they had hit a hospital. They thought they had hit the university network. They had actually hit the network of the clinic running under Düsseldorf University. And when they realized their mistake, they gave the decryption key to the researchers for free and then disappeared. So it's unusual times, but I guess it's unusual times in many ways.
Yeah, but that's kind of an honor system, as Eric said.
Well, yeah, I guess it is.
Criminals.
I mean, of course, we can't really rely on the promises given by criminals, but for most part, it seems that they have been steering away from hospital targets during the pandemic.
Yeah. I'm gonna quote you. I've seen some of your TED talks, and I don't know if I quote you exactly, but you mentioned two greatest tools of our times that's been turned into government surveillance tools. I'm talking about the mobile phones and the internet. George Orwell was an optimist. Can you please explain that?
Yeah, well, George Orwell saw the future fairly well in his books, but even he couldn't imagine a world where every citizen carries a tracking device on their bodies at all times, devices which record our location, record where we are traveling, record who we are communicating with, basically understand what we think. Even Orwell himself couldn't imagine a future like this. But this is exactly where we are living today. We even sleep right next to these tracking devices, which we call the mobile phone. And exactly in the same way, the internet itself is the best innovation of our time and the worst innovation of our time. The connectivity we see has brought us so much business, so much entertainment, so many opportunities, and it has brought us so much misery, so many new risks, so much more crime. So it's the best and the worst at the same time.
Right, so, but what do you think of the integrity? How does it look like in the future, do you think?
We are living in the middle of revolutions. So if you look at how the internet revolution came about, in many ways, that's a revolution which is already behind us. We can still remember the time where we were using computers which were not online. But you can't really find a computer like that anymore. Every computer is already online. So in that sense, the internet revolution already happened. And it did change the way we think about the way we live our lives. We live our lives more and more online. And this is a bit weird for us who remember the time before the internet. But when you speak to 25-year-olds and younger, they have no idea about life, which would only be lived offline. They've only seen a life which you live in the real world and in the online world. And that affects everything around us, including integrity and privacy. And I don't think we really fully understand the implications yet.
What do you think? Do you think it will get worse, or do you think that people will get more aware of their integrity in the future?
I am an optimist, I think. I'd like to think the best about people and the best about technology, even though I regularly see examples of the worst among us and the different ways we can misuse technology. But I'd still like to think we are going to the right direction. The problem is when when technology is good enough, when it's really useful, when we innovate something which can really help us, we very quickly become reliant on that technology. And then it becomes very hard for us to live without that technology. I'll give you an example. Electrical grid, like electrical power. In Helsinki, the electrical grid here was built around 150 years ago. And 150 years actually isn't that long ago. That's when we replaced the gas lights around the streets of Helsinki with electrical lights. And of course, today we are completely reliant on electric power. If power goes out, everything shuts down. Our societies do not function anymore without power, without electrical grid. And if you compare that to internet connectivity, like if the internet goes down, and sometimes it goes down, when the internet goes down, it's pretty bad, but it's not as bad as the power going down because it's still fairly new innovation. But what I'm saying is that in the future, in 10 years, in 20 years, when the internet goes down, it's going to be exactly as bad as power going out. Like you can't do anything. The society will not be able to do anything. In fact, highly likely when internet goes down, power will go down as well. That's how interconnected it will be. So when technology is very useful, it becomes too useful, too good. We become so reliant on it, we can't live without it. And then when you think about upcoming new technologies like machine learning on steroids or artificial intelligence, there's plenty of things to be worried about. But once again, I think the real revolution with those technologies only happen if they become really useful. And I guess many of the risks people think about when they think about artificial intelligence is that, we're all going to be unemployed or we're all going to be killed by this super intelligence which doesn't like us, like we see in the movies. Now, sure, artificial intelligence might make a lot of people intelligent, but let's compare to history again. Around 400 years ago, we invented artificial power, not artificial intelligence, artificial power in the form of the steam engine and electrical engines and things like that. Before that, if you wanted to do anything, you had to use your muscles or the muscles of animals like horses. And sure, the innovation of artificial power made a lot of people unemployed because we didn't need to, use horses to move things between cities anymore. We could use a locomotive, or to build a house, you didn't need to lift the bricks with your muscles. You could use engines. Sure, a lot of people went unemployed because of that innovation, but I don't think any of us would like to go back to the world where we didn't have artificial power. Artificial power is pretty nice. And exactly in the same way, artificial intelligence is going to change the world. It's going to make people unemployed. But I think eventually we would not like to go back to the world without artificial intelligence.
Right. You're well known for fighting worms, like Blaster, for example. How is the war against worms today?
Worms are not really a big threat. No, they are around. And sometimes we see outbreaks, but they are quite different from the kind of outbreaks we saw 15 years ago. The thing about malware history is that we can pretty much divide it to time before 2004 and time after 2004, because around that time is when money making started happening with malware. So when people think back to worm outbreaks like Code Red or Melissa or Blaster or Slammer, those are all before 2004. None of those tried making money. So why were they written then? Well, typically just because someone wanted to write a worm and see how quickly does it spread. Like what's going to be the fastest worm? Or how far would this spread? Or maybe for no reason at all. Nevertheless, the creators of Melissa and Blaster and Love Letter got nothing. They gained nothing out of the malware they wrote. And then when money making started happening in the form of feeding spammers or building botnets or stealing credit card numbers or with banking Trojans or ransom Trojans, that changed everything. Suddenly, there was no point in writing a worm which gets out of control and infects 10 million computers overnight, because the only thing that gets is that your worm becomes a news item. It ends up on the front page of CNN.com. And if you're trying to make money with crime, you don't want to be on the front page of CNN.com. So this really drove worms underground. And instead of seeing these large outbreaks which get out of control, we see much more controlled botnets which are throttled and on purpose kept below the horizon. And today, most of the worm outbreaks we see actually are in the world of IoT. So we see, for example, IoT worms related to the Mirai worm, which we saw 4 years ago, going around and infecting security cameras and doorbells and smart fridges. And they are out of control on those platforms, but they are not making the kinds of headlines we used to see.
Okay, but you were involved in fighting Blaster, right?
Sure. I remember that very well. That was 2003.
Yeah. Were you the one who found a cure for it, if you speak, Dr. White?
Well, not me alone. Me and my team did find a cure for it. Those we called those years the virus war years, because 2002, 2003, 2004 they were just filled with massively large outbreaks, global outbreaks, which we were fighting basically 7 days a week, and we were woken up in the middle of the night regularly to reverse engineer malware and to build detections for it. And the company was still smaller at the time, which meant we only had one lab in the world, which was in Helsinki, which means if something happened in the middle of the night, we were fighting it from Helsinki in the middle of the night. Then around 2005, we built one lab in California and one lab in Malaysia. So then we had like 8-hour time difference between the labs, which means we got 24-hour coverage without working in the middle of the night. But those times, the Blaster time was still before that. And I guess Blaster is historic for a couple of reasons, 2 reasons really, which are related. Blaster was using a remote Windows RPC vulnerability to infect Windows computers. And what that really meant is that you were working on your Windows machine, then someone somewhere on the internet tried connecting to your IP address and managed to crash the RPC process in your Windows and use that to infect your machine. And that means that Windows gives you a warning that, remote procedure call process has crashed. Windows will reboot in 60 seconds. Please save your work. And then Windows would shut down and reboot. Now, then you would reboot, and highly likely you would see the same message again within a couple of minutes, because there were so many infected machines on the internet. So eventually, of course, if this happens over and over again, you can't work, so you go looking for help. And someone who knows what's happening will tell you that it's a worm and you need to update your Windows to fix the RPC vulnerability. And there was a fix available. However, this was before Windows Update. So the way you updated your Windows was that you went with your browser, which was IE at the time, to Microsoft.com, and you downloaded the patch, and then you installed the patch, and then you were safe. However, when you opened up your computer and went to Microsoft.com and started downloading the patch, it was highly likely that during that process, you got the same 60-second reboot message again. So you were basically running a race against the clock, hoping to be quick enough to download the patch before your machine reboots. And this race was being played on thousands of computers around the world. So that was one thing which was unique about Blaster. The other thing which is related, which is unique, is that Blaster was effectively the worm which broke the camel's back. I mean, Microsoft's customers wouldn't take this anymore. And there were so many complaints to Microsoft that they really turned around and started trustworthy computing initiative. And for example, they stopped all development for any new, they stopped coding for 6 months and went looking for bugs and vulnerabilities instead. And they introduced Windows Update. This is one of the reasons why Windows Update was created, and that's what we still use today.
I'm going back to the internet topic, and I'm going to quote you again. You, in your talk, you talk about RIP internet, and internet is on fire.
Well, internet is, like I said, the best and the worst thing of our lives. But if the internet revolution itself already is behind us, The next technological revolution is only beginning, and that's the IoT revolution. And when people think about IoT, they immediately think about smart devices like smart televisions or smart fridges or smart cars. I'm not speaking about that. I'm not that worried about smart devices. I'm much more worried about stupid devices. The thing about smart devices is that when users buy smart devices, they typically know and they typically understand that those devices are online. I mean, the reason why people buy smart TVs is that they want to watch Netflix on the TV. They understand that the TV is on the internet, sure. But what's going to happen in the near future is that stupid devices like, I don't know, toasters or thermostats or heaters in your house are going to be online as well. And you don't even know. That's not the reason why you buy. You don't want your toaster to be online, but it's going to be online anyway. And the reason why they're going to be online is that data is valuable. Data is money. Everybody wants to collect data. And if you are a toaster manufacturer, the way you collect data about, for example, where your customers are, is that you put them online. And toasters aren't online yet because it isn't cheap enough to do this yet, but it's getting cheaper very quickly. And in the near future, they will be online. And that's going to be a big shift. And that's going to change the fabric of the internet itself.
It's kind of interesting because as a consumer, maybe you're looking at the toaster. Oh, it's a smart toaster because the manufacturer, maybe they are doing some commercial that like this is the best toaster, it's smart and so on. But they actually want your data, the information about you.
Yeah, and I don't think anybody really needs internet. I mean, you don't need an app to tell you that your toast is done. Like you just don't need that. I wouldn't buy a smart toaster. I think they will be going online without telling the user that they will be online. If it's cheap enough, they will like build the functionality in and have them go online and report where they are and how they're being used and what kind of, problem situation. Like how often do their toasters catch fire? That's interesting information for toaster manufacturers. And for the first time, they can collect that information because all of their devices will be online.
So the future of the internet, how would you think that the internet will look like in the future?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's probably going to look different than what we can think today. Internet is one of the very few truly and really global things we have. Like there's pretty much nothing, like we don't have really anything comparable to the internet, which really and truly is actionable and accessible from anywhere on the planet, which has great benefits and great problems. And as we've seen over the last years, there's more and more progress towards turning this global internet into these disconnected islands or islands which are only partially connected with each other. When you think about the Chinese internet hidden behind the Great Firewall, or I don't know, Russian internet, which is where they are building similar situations, or different levels of filtering in different places, and even like Western or Nordic operators sometimes speak about how much bad traffic or spam they are getting from certain countries, and they're considering blocking all traffic from those countries because of the problems they see. Now, I can understand why we see these developments, but in my book, any development which would cannibalize the internet or turn internet from this global resource into disconnected islands would be a bad development. And I hope internet will continue to be truly and really global.
Yeah, right. And what do you think is the biggest cybersecurity threat at the moment?
As a technical threat, it is ransomware. Ransomware continues to be a massively large problem because it makes so much money. And ransomware wouldn't be a problem if the victims wouldn't pay the ransom, but victims pay the ransom. And that's why the attackers make millions. And if you are making millions with attacks, you're not going to stop. So again, I think we've only seen the very beginning of these problems. And one shift that's happening right now is what I'm calling shift from ransomware version 1 to version 2. Ransomware traditionally has been making money by just locking you out of your own data with encryption. And that's been a problem for 6 years now. And 6 years has been enough time for companies to realize this and react to it. And today, backup policies and backup functionality in companies is in much, much better shape than what it was 6 years ago. Backups cover typically now, at least in enterprise systems, they cover all the data from all the servers, all the laptops. The backups are tested, the recovery process and restore is tested, they cover frequent enough backups. All this is done largely because of this ransomware problem. Backup policies were not nearly this good before ransomware. And of course, ransomware gangs, the criminals, realized this. So now we're moving to version 2, which was started with the Maze ransomware gang in January of 2020, where the idea is that first they encrypt your data, like always, but they also take a copy of your data. For example, your enterprise email server or your project files. And then if you don't pay the ransom to get your files back because you have a backup already, then they will threaten to publish your data. And there's nothing you can do to fight this with backups. And no company wants to have their email archives published or their patent applications published. And the only way you can stop it is by paying. And this is why we've seen so many large, well-known companies during this year pay multi-million ransoms.
So, are we ready to fight this second version of ransomware, you think? Do we have any idea how to stop it?
Well, the best thing you can do is to keep the attackers out, but that's easy to say and hard to do. When we look at how ransomware enters corporate networks, it's either through email. This used to be the norm, email, links and email attachments. But over the last year, it's been moving more and more towards RDP servers, VPN servers, and Citrix servers, and then using known vulnerabilities on these servers. So we're not speaking about zero-day vulnerabilities on public-facing servers. We're speaking about something which is patchable and fixable. But since the internet is very large, the attacker will always find some organization which has a forgotten server somewhere and are able to find their way into the network. And once they are in any part of the network with any kind of rights, then they can use vulnerabilities to escalate privileges and gain access to encrypt everything they want or to steal everything they want. The new zero logon vulnerability, which was found just a couple of weeks ago, is a great example of that. Any user account in Windows network can run code on the AD as an administrator, which is horrible. And that's exactly the kind of things ransomware gangs are looking for. So you should assume that you won't be able to keep them out of your network. So then the second best thing to do is that you're able to detect them as quickly as possible. Ransomware gangs don't immediately, when they get into your network, they don't immediately start encrypting stuff. They might spend days, weeks, doing lateral movement to make sure they gain access to all the data, especially your backup servers. So you have time to find them if you are looking for them. And that requires you to be looking for them. You need to be having a view of your environment. You have to know what normal looks like in your network. So then you can start looking for abnormal things. So you need agents that collect logs, and you need tokens which are tripwiring as there's weird access happening inside of your organization, so you can detect that something bad is going on.
Right. Okay, so we're reaching the end of this interview. But last, what will you do next? Maybe something you're working on, or a speech?
Well, since during the pandemic, I've been sitting at home like the rest of the world, pretty much. I've been working on a book. I should be coming out with a book during 2021. Wish me luck on that.
Good luck on that. What will it?
It's going to be about hunting hackers. That's all I'm going to tell you so far.
But is it a novel or a fact?
You'll have to buy it to find out.
I hope you translate it in Swedish.
Yeah, let's hope so.
Okay. Thank you so much
Thanks
for having us.
Thanks for having me.